Hi, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Emily from GoWP, and welcome to today's webinar, Landing Bigger Projects, Increasing Recurring Revenue, and Making the World a Better Place with Accessibility with Amber Hines of Equalize Digital. Thanks for joining us today, Amber.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited about this one. So really quick, I just want to say a couple of words about GoWP in case anyone watching isn't familiar with us. At GoWP, it's our mission to create happiness by helping agency owners grow and increase profits. So whether you're ready to bring on a new team member or you're looking to outsource work so you can focus on growth, we've got you covered. I also want to mention that creating a GoWP partner account is 100% free, and it gets you access to all sorts of resources to grow your agency. Currently in our knowledge base there in the GoWP partner portal, we have landing page templates to help you sell care plans. We have a maintenance schedule lead magnet downloadable and a landing page template to use with that to help you generate leads and increase your recurring revenue. And we've also got all sorts of documentation that you can take and make your own, apply your colors, your branding, all that kind of stuff, and then use it with your clients and prospects. You can create your partner account at my.gowp.com, and we'll share the link in the chat so everyone has access to that. And if you haven't created your account, I hope you do. So if you have any questions about partnering with GoWP and how GoWP can help your agency grow, feel free to reach out. I'm in the Facebook group all the time, so that's the Niche Agency Owners Facebook group. On our website, we have a chat option. You can email me, Emily@GoWP. Any of that. So about the Facebook group, for those of you watching here in the Zoom webinar who may not be a member yet, it is the GoWP Niche Agency Owners Facebook group. This is a community of agency professionals, agency owners, freelancers, industry professionals, all sorts of people who are in this business and help with one goal in mind, and that's helping each other grow. And we do lots of things like this webinar to help promote that. So we're broadcasting this webinar live in the group now, and it will be available there afterward to watch as well. So you can check it out and request to join. We'll share the link to that also in just a minute. And the other great thing is that you'll have all the access to the comments and things that are made during this webinar there. Amber's a member of the group. If you have questions, you can tag her in it. So it's a great way to kind of keep the conversation going. A few notes regarding the webinar. I will be watching the chat both here in the Zoom webinar and over on Facebook. So if you have any questions, throw them out there and we'll get them to Amber, whether it's during the presentation or at the end. We'll save time for Q&A. So one way or another, we will get to your questions. I see that the chat is working here in the Zoom room. So if you all want to say hi, let us know where you're watching from. Let us know you're here. That would be fantastic. We're excited to see everybody. And over on Facebook, give us some likes and comments and let us know you're watching. So let's go ahead and get to why we're here today. Amber Hines is the CEO of Equalize Digital, which is a website accessibility consulting firm striving to create a world where all people have equal access to information and tools on the internet, regardless of ability. In 2020, Equalize Digital launched the Accessibility Checker plugin, which scans WordPress sites for accessibility problems. Amber is passionate about building a more equitable web and inspiring others to make their websites accessible. Welcome, Amber.
Thanks so much. I'm excited to be here. I'm going to dive right in. Oh, somebody said they use my plugin and they like it, so that's awesome. Thank you, Christopher. That's probably the last time I will see the chat now that I'm sharing my screen. Hopefully everybody can see this.
Yeah, I think it's coming through.
Is it coming? Do we have slides?
One moment. It says you've started screen sharing. Let's see.
Is it going? No?
Not yet. It says that you've started screen sharing, but we're not seeing your screen just yet.
Okay.
That's interesting. Maybe try it again. Yeah, let's stop and try again.
Oh, things live are always fun.
I know, and we did test this, everybody. So don't think we weren't prepared, because we did test this before starting.
How about now?
It is still, I'm just seeing black.
Oh. Okay, I think I may have had a Zoom bug, but it looks like I'm back. So I'm going to try one more time. Sorry
Okay.
about that. All right, let's see. Sharing my sound, sharing this. Here we go. Can you see now?
Yes, we've got it now. You're good to
Okay,
go.
awesome. I don't know what that was about. I apologize. Okay, so I'm not going to talk a huge bit about me and who I am until, I'm happy to answer any questions there. So I'm going to dive right in. The main goals for this presentation is I'm hoping that everyone will know why you should include accessibility in every proposal that you do, have some ideas for how you might figure out pricing your accessibility offerings, and then getting ideas for how you can add accessibility into existing care plans and increase your recurring revenue with accessibility. And then finally, I'm going to do a quick little demo about how to test websites for accessibility, both manually and with some automated tools. If you aren't familiar with website accessibility, I always think it's good to just kind of cover the basics because we don't know who all is in the presentation. So an accessible website is one that can be used by everyone, people of all abilities and disabilities. I have an example, an image up here on the screen of a gentleman that's got cerebral palsy and he's using a computer. So that is one example of someone who might have some motor difficulties that makes it challenging for them to use. But really, website accessibility helps a huge variety of people. So this could be people who have that are blind or visually impaired, people that are deaf or hard of hearing, people with cognitive disabilities, which could include something that is more severe cognitive disability, or maybe someone who just has a reading disability or dyslexia, and certain fonts make it challenging for them to read and understand the content that they're seeing. The example I showed previously of maybe somebody who's unable to use a traditional keyboard and mouse to navigate. That could be somebody who doesn't have the use of their arms at all, or somebody who is blind and they can fully use their hands, but they can't actually see where they're putting a mouse on the screen, so they're not able to use a mouse to navigate the web. People with seizure disorders. And then we get into a whole nother group of people that we don't typically think of as disabled, but these are individuals who benefit from accessibility features on websites. So these are things like the elderly and less tech savvy people, people that are on mobile devices in rural areas or on metered connections and have slower internet connections, and then people with temporary or situational limitations. An example of a temporary limitation would be if I broke my hand and for a short time while it's healing, I can't use this hand and I only have one hand to use the computer. A situational limitation example is someone who is maybe sitting on a train and they forgot their headphones and they want to watch a video, but they can't do it if there's no captions because they don't want to play the sound in front of everyone that's on the train. So those are examples of temporary or situational limitations. So really accessibility impacts a broad variety of people. And the market reach here in the United States, the Centers for Disease Control says that 1 in 4 US adults have a disability. In the world, that's about 15% of the world's population. And the after-tax disposable income for working age people with disabilities is $490 billion. So if you have customers that are making sales through their website, this is a large population that if they are able to reach, could be spending money with your clients on their website. So you think with this large population that most websites would be accessible. And the unfortunate reality is that the vast majority of websites have accessibility errors. WebAIM is a nonprofit organization. They do a study every year where they scan the top 1 million websites. By top, they mean the ones that get the most traffic. And as of February of this year, their result was that 98.1% of those websites have detectable accessibility errors on them. And then I also have a chart up here that shows the ADA stands for the Americans with Disabilities Act lawsuits that have been filed related to website accessibility. And it shows in 2016, 262, 2017, 814, 2018, 2,314. So there's a very big jump from 814 to 2,314 lawsuits. And then in 2019, we have 2,890, and in 2020, 3,550. So there are a large number of people who are filing lawsuits, and we can certainly talk more about that in the Q&A, related to accessibility on websites. So why accessibility matters? Of course, it's the right thing to do, and I wish that that was the sole reason we could use with our clients in order to get them to make every website accessible. But in reality, we often have to make a business case for accessibility. And so some of the things that we share with them are the numbers and the data, and the things like it will increase their audience and reach. There's an overlap between accessibility and SEO. It could help them rank better in search engines. It can increase conversion rates. I read a study that said like something like 75% of people with disabilities, especially people who are blind or visually impaired, if they come to a website and they realize it won't work for them, they just leave right away. So it can decrease bounce rate, and it can increase if you then make the website accessible, it can increase the number of people who can actually take the actions you want on the website. It allows companies to align their online presence with their company values. So if you have a client who is a nonprofit, let's say, or a for-profit that is laid out what their values of their organization are, oftentimes accessibility fits in with actually achieving and living those values. Having an accessible website can reduce ongoing operational costs, because if people can get information off the website, maybe they're calling less, trying to submit orders on the phone, those sorts of things. So it can actually make things easier and less operationally expensive for the website owner. And in many cases, it is legally required. So why does accessibility matter to you as an agency owner or a freelancer or a developer? One, if you have the ability to build accessible websites, you can take on bigger, more high value projects and clients. So as I mentioned, in some cases, it's legally required. Some examples of that are in the United States. Any website that is federally funded, this could include colleges and universities, government, public sector agencies, any sort of nonprofits that's gotten a federal grant, those are all required to be accessible under Section 508. A lot of state websites as well are required to be accessible. So if you want to have clients in those areas, you want to be able to take on these bigger projects that maybe bill more or potentially have higher profit margins, then you have to be able to deliver accessible solutions. And then on the for-profit side, it is often the case that enterprise businesses also need to have accessible websites. They may be more likely to get sued, or in certain areas, there may be laws specifically targeting them. Outside of the United States, one that got a lot of traction at the beginning of this year is in Ontario, the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act. It said all businesses that have 50 employees or more must have an accessible website as of January of this year. So really, if you want to go after those bigger clients, then this is something that you need to be comfortable doing and know how to deliver. And then, as we're going to talk about in just a little bit, accessibility provides greater opportunities for recurring revenue, which could come in the form of monitoring or remediation packages. So I'm going to start with accessibility in new website builds. I don't really have time to go into all of the things you have to do in order to make a website accessible. I have a checklist that we use internally. So if you want to email me afterwards, I'm happy to send it to you. But basically, you need to think about, ideally, your accessibility happening throughout the entire project. So accessibility is not just something that you figure out during testing and debug, and then you've designed the website, you've built the website, now we're testing for accessibility and making it accessible. The best way is to make sure that it happens throughout the entire project, from the discovery phase. So we use that a lot with like training with our clients when they show us websites that they like, or features, or they start talking about, oh, this slider or these things flying in from the sides. Like, that is an opportunity when we start to talk about, okay, well, what would be the implications of that from an accessibility perspective? Can we actually do this? So it's almost like framing your conversations with your clients so that it shapes their expectations before you even get to content and design. We do content first. Some people do design first. So this timeline may or may not match your process, but it matches ours. And then there's things that we do during the content phase with regards to accessibility. Like we make sure that our clients are not putting click here as the words for their links when they're linking it, right? They're using meaningful text. We have them give us content. If they're giving us content, we teach them about subheadings, and we have them give us content in a tool where they actually set the subheadings and they have to put them in the right order. So they can't go from an H1 to an H4. They have to go from an H1 to an H2, those sorts of things. So you have to sort of think about that. Content design is more on you and has a little bit more control, but thinking about colors and contrast and what the ultimate functionality that you're hoping to get with the design and how it might relate. And then obviously a big chunk of accessibility happens during development. And then during testing and debug, you do some additional testing. You might include user testing, maybe not. And then launch, and then with training as well. So when you're selling accessibility, and I'm going to revisit that timeline in just a minute, but I want to talk a little bit first about how do we sell this to our clients. The first one is that if you're just starting out, or even we do this too. We have some clients come to us and maybe they don't have a full budget, or we've talked about accessibility and they aren't like convinced that it's something they want to pay for. We put it as a project option on every proposal. Some proposals we know, this is for a university, it has to be accessible. This is not an option. You can't not select this, right? It's built into the project because it has to be there. For other ones like for-profit businesses, smaller businesses, it is an option. So the client can decline it if they want, but it still puts it in front of them. And it is a way that we can then potentially increase the revenue on the project and also, deliver something that we feel best about, right? But we also have to recognize that for some clients, it may not be something that they select. When you're trying to figure out how to talk to them, we talk about accessibility on an equal playing field with SEO. So SEO is really important for your business, and here's why. Here's what we do during the website project to help with your SEO. We talk about accessibility in the same way. It should be introduced early to the client during the buying process. Have you heard of accessibility? Let's talk about what that means. How can accessibility benefit your business? And so that's really where I talked about making that business case. Getting to know who are their clients, who are the people they are serving before you write that proposal, because that might be a way for you to help to better shift in and say, oh, well, you've described to us these people. We can see that these XYZ people are more likely to have a disability or a challenge that might get in their way. And so let's make your website usable for them, because that will ensure that you achieve your goals of getting them to make a purchase or fill out an inquiry form or whatever that might be. So you really want to think about that business case and selling them on how accessibility will help them meet their bottom line. So then another thing too is, let's say you've put it in as an option, the client has declined it as an option. You may want to consider having your client sign a waiver if they decline accessibility services. So get something in writing that says, I understand that accessibility may be legally required for my business under XYZ, whatever you think applies to them, right? And I, company name Equalize Digital has offered me accessibility as part of my website as an add-on, and at this time I'm declining it, and I am, removing any claims against them regarding the accessibility of my website. So that's something, I'm not an attorney, I'm not going to advise you on that, but you may want to talk about whoever does your contract. Does it make sense? I know we have a sample one, but it's something that sometimes it can help sell them because they go, oh, okay. But other times it could be useful in the awful case that your client does get sued, that you have in writing that you offered to do this thing and they didn't have the budget for it, or they didn't want to do it. And so it's kind of a cover your behind sort of thing. And then you want to generally, as you're selling it, be aware that accessibility has design and functionality implications, and you want to prepare your client for that. You know, we're not going to be putting things that rapidly blink all over because they might cause someone to have a seizure. So, you know, different sorts of implications for how it might impact the design and their end product. So how do you charge for this? This is something that people ask me a lot. So when I was showing that timeline that showed all the different phases and talking about the different things, I think what you need to account for is, I put training first, even though training is at the end. But as I mentioned, we start training the client on accessibility at the beginning of the I mean, we're talking about different things even while we're writing the proposal. When we get into discovery, we're using their, like, looking at their ideal websites. We're using those as examples of, you know, good and bad, and how, you know, what's accessible like on this website. So like planting little seeds, right? That makes it easier when we get to design. We do a lot of training with content, especially important if your client's going to be maintaining their own content. Maybe they're not, maybe you have, you're working with GoWP and they're doing all the content edits. And so that's awesome. You don't have to worry about, you know, somebody randomly picking an H6 just because it's small. But if they are going to be maintaining their own content, you need to start thinking and shaping that when they're giving you the content for the website, if you're not writing it, so that they are aware of what headings are and how do I choose which number heading to use. Those sorts of things happen in the content phase, and it's better to do it earlier rather than after you've launched the website. And then you may have additional training post-launch as well. During discovery, you probably need to account for some extra research on plugins, themes, or code. Over time, you start to know, like we know, if somebody wants to use an event calendar plugin, here's one that we know will work, or will work with XYZ modifications, which we've done previously, you know, those sorts of things. So over time, you start to figure that out. But I'd say in the beginning, you probably want to account for more time testing different plugins or themes, and trying to figure out, you know, what will work, what will not, especially if you get a unique request from a client that you've never had before. Like we sometimes have to say, okay, we're going to need to add extra time for discovery because we know that they want this functionality. We don't know that there's a plugin out of the box that's going to work for this and be accessible. There might be a plugin that works for it. That's great, but we need to account for time to like research it and figure out what we have to fix on it in order to use it. And then development, I think the building time is really the same. And you'll notice I skipped design. The reason why I skipped design is I don't think that making your websites accessible causes an extra cost at the design phase, because assuming you know, you're just going to design it in an accessible manner. You're not going to put light gray text on a white background. And in that same sense, that sort of helps with development as well. You're starting from accessible designs. You know, a lot of those dev choices might already be made. And then, so really what's going to happen is, as long as you're sort of following best practices for development, then it wouldn't add any extra time to make it accessible. But what does add extra time during development is time that you need to spend remediating issues in third-party themes or plugins. So you need to maybe account for that. And ideally, your developer is testing for those things. Like we say early and often, developers need to know how to use screen readers. They should be using automated scanning tools or coding linters. But really, like, you want to be remediating those plugins during development, not later on during testing and debug. And then during testing and debug, if you are not already doing screen reader testing and keyboard testing, which I'm going to demo in just a little bit, or user testing, then you would need to add in time to account for that. You may do it on every page if it's a small website. If it is a website that, let's say it's a publisher and they have 500 blog posts, you're probably not going to keyboard and screen reader test every one of those blog posts. So you might choose a selective sample, and the client needs to be aware of that, right? And they're going to help you choose which are the ones we do, and then maybe you teach them how to do it if they want to do more. But really, like, if this isn't something you're doing, then it will add extra time to your testing phase, so you'll want to account for that in your quote. So how much time does that add in reality? I have two examples for you. And they're sort of on different ends of the spectrum. So this is a website. I have a picture up of a front end website on a computer monitor and a portal on a laptop monitor, and they're both the same website. It's actually a WordPress multi-site install that we did for Workforce Solutions Panhandle. And it was pretty much a fully custom. There wasn't much that we pulled in for third-party plugins, aside from, you know, like we used ACF and things like that. We did use the events calendar on this website. And we used a very small instance of Facet WP, but pretty much most of everything in this and the functionality was either sort of in our custom theme or in custom plugins that we built. The whole project in and of itself was 1,288-ish hours. And of that, when I looked back at our time reports, we had 26.24 hours that we specifically clocked in our time tracking software as accessibility hours. So when we clock them specifically as accessibility hours, that's either doing accessibility testing. We did user testing on this. So like writing the brief for the user testing, managing the user testing session, and then putting in the to-dos that came out of the user testing session. And then any sort of remediation that was specifically accessibility related. Now, again, like during design, things happened that were accessibility, but it wasn't really specific to accessibility, so it wouldn't have been tagged as accessibility specific hours. So in this instance, if you do the math on that, the accessibility specific stuff that happened that was truly not just us following accessibility best practices, it was only about a 2% increase in time spent over this huge project. But it was because it was hugely custom. And so most of what we did was built from this sort of shift left accessibility first perspective. And so we didn't have to do as much at the end. Now, a smaller example, although I recognize I tried to find, I don't have a good example of one that's like a 40-hour website project, and I apologize. But this is a smaller website for Colorado Wyoming Alliance for Minority Participation. It was just a front end website. There's an image up that shows just the front end website. And the whole project itself for us was about 239 hours. And there is a lot more like custom post types and that sort of stuff happening. However, on this website, we used, so this was one that we used a lot of Facet WP, and that is a great plugin, and it's not one I want to knock, but it requires a lot of remediation. And it had some other like plugins that were just like, oh, let's just put this in because it has great functionality, but we knew we were going to have to remediate. So those accessibility hours on this one were a little bit over 31 hours. So it was actually a 13% increase in the amount of time it took us to make this accessible than it would have if we had just launched it the way it was. I've seen on like some of our smaller projects, but I didn't have good numbers on it, like sometimes up to 20% is what I would say. So if you're trying to figure out, I've never done accessibility before, how do I charge for this? I would say probably at a minimum, you want to start with like that 20% increase over your budget. Maybe it's on every phase you increase by 20% just to like cover your bases. But that's maybe sort of like the baseline at the beginning. And then some projects, you know, will be more intense than others potentially, depending on how many things you're pulling in. User testing, when we do user testing, and if we're going to charge for it on a very small site, I have up some information here that's minimum. So drafting a brief probably is 2 to 4 hours. A testing session would be at least 4 hours times however many testers you're doing. We don't do testing sessions with less than 2 testers because we just want to have multiple opinions. And then drafting a report of your findings or putting in tasks. So a report, I'm thinking it could be 4 to 6 hours. Hopefully you've done a good job and there's not a huge amount, but there could be a lot. Now, if you don't have to do a report, where you send to the client, you're like, here's all the problems, here's how we're going to fix them, here's who they impact, like which disabilities they impact, and what the, you know, how critical or not it is. If you don't have to draft a report like that, it can go a lot faster if you're just doing a user testing session and then putting to-dos in your project management platform for your developer or your content person. That is a lot faster. And I think before I move into recurring revenue, I wanted to see if there were any questions related to pricing on a new website build or anything like that.
Thank you, Amber. This has all been really great. I want to say one thing really fast. If you have any questions about pricing regarding this, put them in the chat or over on the Facebook comments. We did have a little disconnect over on the Facebook live stream. So there's a new link there. I hope everybody has found us again. I know Joanne linked everybody there, so sorry about that. Not sure what happened there with the connection between Zoom and Facebook. No questions, Amber, but Melanie did add in that she said hers run at about 30 to 50% depending on the features that she offers.
Okay,
so
really 30 to 50% more. Yeah, so I mean, I think it varies on everyone, and I will say, like, definitely the more, like, the newer you are at it, probably the more time it might take, or it could also take more time if you're starting with a brand new website versus importing in somebody's existing WordPress site where they've maybe managed all the content themselves and they have no idea. Like, that could definitely increase time as well. So,
absolutely. We did have a couple other questions come in, but we can save those for the end. So that's fine. Thank you, Amber.
Okay. So recurring revenue for accessibility, there are two main ways that we do recurring revenue with regards to accessibility. One is adding accessibility monitoring. I think this is more ideal for clients that are adding or editing their own content. And typically we say you can only get accessibility monitoring if we know your website is mostly accessible, right? Otherwise, if they are coming to you in an existing website and they want to make it accessible, and this is where you can offer accessibility remediation packages, which allow you to make websites accessible over time. Of course, you can do sometimes it just makes sense to build a whole new website. So it's a one and done kind of, we build the new website, we know it's accessible, we launch it. Other times, maybe their website works on all other fronts, like it is converting, it has great SEO, the design is good, like they don't want a new website, right? Or they don't have the budget for a full-blown, like, remediate this all at once. So that's where it can be useful to space out remediation and make, you know, that gives you some of that recurring revenue as opposed to just a one-off remediation project. So if you're doing accessibility monitoring, what would that look like? We do our Accessibility Checker Pro plugin. You can do automated scans on a monthly or weekly basis. You could do this monthly. You could also do quarterly. You don't have to use our plugin. I have an image up here that shows our plugin and every page and the issues on the side on like a test website. But you could also use, there's some great tools out there that are third-party services that do this. Site Improve is one, Monsito, Pope Tech uses the Wave API. Those are just 3 examples. So it doesn't have to be within WordPress. I think it's nice if it's in the WordPress dashboard, but there are other tools. So what you would do is basically you'd have some sort of regular scanning setup. And then what's nice about having it in the dashboard is that even if your client is editing their own content, they might not know how to fix things. So this can be a way for them to be like, oh, I added this page and it's got 19 errors and 5 color contrast things, and I don't know how to fix it. And then they come to you, and now you have a support request to make that page accessible. Another thing you could do is you could offer monthly or quarterly manual accessibility audits or user testing spot checks, either on new pages that they've added or high traffic pages. You could package a certain number of on-demand manual audits or fixes into your care plans. There's a lot of different ways you can approach this that allows you to sort of space it out and make accessibility maybe more bite-sized for the client, but also something that you are striving to together. So I think one thing that's important is, it's like we said before, it's like SEO. When you talk to them about it's like SEO, it's the same deal. Accessibility isn't something that necessarily you just arrive at. It's sort of a journey, and obviously we can be more accessible and less accessible, but it is something that needs to be watched and monitored over time on a website that is changing. So the remediation packages, if you're going to do that, typically we would start by selling an audit. So you use the audit to sell them on remediation over time. You want to offer 2 to 3 packages based upon your client's needs and prioritize items that show up on every page as your first fixes. So if there's something in the header, the footer, sidebars, like get those things fixed first. And then what we would do is we would work on pages based on importance in the user journey. So the cart and checkout pages, any pages with forms, like places where people can take real meaningful action on the website, we want to make sure it is possible for everyone to do that. And then we go through pages based upon their traffic levels. So that's sort of how we prioritize our fixes. And you really just, knowing your clients, need to figure out, what does this look like? Like, am I charging them 4 hours a month or 8 hours and 12 hours? You know, you just have to choose what those packages look like that make sense for your clients. And then you need to make sure that you have the right tools in order to deliver on all of this. So some recommendations that we have for design is the Adobe Accessible Color Palette. I really like that color palette because not only does it will show you the traditional color palette, and then it will show you 3 different versions of colorblind, and it will notify you if there's a conflict of any of your colors for someone who is colorblind, because you want to make sure that they look different as well. If you use Adobe XD, Sketch, or Figma to do your designs, there's an add-on called Stark that does rapid contrast testing and will check for contrast in design. So that's great. For developers, Axe Linter and WebHint are really great linters. If you're not familiar with the linter, a linter is something that will scan your code and check for errors as you code locally on your computer. That's WebHint. Axe Linter actually does it as you push to GitHub, so you need to have like a repo on GitHub, and then it will make suggestions about how to fix it. So those are 2, they're both free. If you are choosing a theme from WordPress to start from, it's great to look at the accessibility ready themes on WordPress.org. Those are ones that you know have been looked at by people who actually understand accessibility, and they've been said, yes, this is a great starting point. So if you are building from a theme, that might be a great place to start from. And then on the testing front, obviously we'll promote our plugin, does scanning in the dashboard, but also you want to use Axe and Wave are the 2 most popular browser extensions. Using our plugin or using, you know, Site Improve, like we talked about, doesn't mean that you don't also use browser extensions to test. Different tools catch different things. Unfortunately, not everything can be caught by an automated scan, and not every automated scan will catch everything exactly the same way. So we recommend using a couple. And then from a testing perspective, my favorite screen reader is NVDA, which is free and works on Windows. But if you have a Mac, you also can use VoiceOver, which is included on your Mac. You just turn it on in your accessibility settings on the Mac. It has a tutorial when you use it. I'll admit I'm giving this presentation not on my normal computer, which is a Mac, because I'm going to show you a screen reader in a minute. I just like NVDA better. I think it is for desktop users, it is the most popular screen reader. However, on a mobile device, VoiceOver is the most popular for blind users. So you do want to check on both, but those are some areas to start. So that brings me to an overlay, and we can talk about this forever. I don't want to go way down, but you have your right tools and then your overlays. And unfortunately, as much as we want to say that some of those automated fixers that use AI, or they say include this line of code and we'll make your website accessible, most accessibility professionals do not recommend those. As mentioned, scanners can't find everything. They can't fix everything. So there's no way it will make your website 100% accessible. And if you read the fine print, they all actually say that in their terms of service, that they don't make your website 100% accessible. And in fact, there have been actually instances of people suing websites who use those and citing problems that were caused by those tools. So they can actually add accessibility problems. I can send the slides because there are links in the slides. There's an example of a lawsuit that has a really great report that's like 50 pages that goes into one of these tools and all the problems that it specifically had. So we don't ever recommend them to our clients. We might have some clients who go out and get them, but I always advise them not to, or I say we still have to do accessibility things on your website if you truly want it to be accessible. So I just feel like as a web professional, I don't feel comfortable recommending them. And so that's sort of where I stand. Like, I wouldn't advise you to recommend them to your clients. Are there any questions about that before I do a quick testing, how to test?
There was one question, Amber, that came in earlier, but I think it's related to what we're talking about right now, and it's regarding the your plugin. So the question was, how accurate is the plugin in finding those issues? So I know it's kind of related, not exactly, but I think we'll probably see that in your demo here.
Yeah. So maybe let me show the plugin, and then maybe I can address that question.
Awesome.
So we'll talk about how to test for accessibility, and then I'm going to actually show you, but I want to give you just a feel for how we do it. So first, we always run automated scans with testing tools because they can get a number of items that are obvious. What's really nice about bulk scanning tools like our plugin or some of the third-party options is that they can scan the entire site and they can tell you some really obvious things, so that you can know without having to go physically look at every page. They won't catch every issue, right? So after doing the automated testing, we use keyboards only to navigate through the website. We look for a number of items, which I'll talk about. And then we also, after doing keyboard testing, we do screen reader testing. I like to do keyboard first to make sure I have all of my focus states visible, because it's easier to screen reader test if they are. And then we do screen reader testing. In our process, we do all of this ourselves before we bring in users to user testing. And the reason why is we really want our users to give us a really broad picture of, we don't want them to give us a broad picture of obvious accessibility errors. I don't need an experienced screen reader user to come tell me that my headings are in the wrong order, I'm missing alt on an image. That's a waste of their time, right? Like, what we want them to do is come in and be like, I was trying to go figure out when the next event was on the event calendar. I couldn't get to X, like some really specific problem. So we try to do our best to make a website accessible before we bring in user testing. And that's what I recommend, because you get the most bang for your buck to like do everything you possibly can before you have a user come in and test. So let me move this Zoom thing. So what we're going to look at real quick is it's just a demo site that we have. As you can see, it's fake. It's not a real website, but this is what it looks like on the front end. It's just a theme with demo content that I installed on the site. What our plugin looks like on the back end. So if we look at the back end of this page, it happens to be built with Gutenberg, but it does work with other page builders. There is a section down at the bottom that shows a summary. We'll say what percent of tests you've passed. We don't say 100% accessible because, again, like no automated tool can do that. The number of errors, number of contrast errors, number of warnings, and then if you've ignored items because you've said, hey, this is like a false positive, it's not actually a problem, you can mark it as resolved, which will eventually get you to 100% pass tests. This is a little bit like Yoast in that when all of these go away, there'll be these three, the errors, contrast errors, and warnings will all be green, and they'll say 0. And so it's saying, ideally, that's what you want. You want this to be all green. You want it to say 100%. And then you know that you've at least passed all of the automated scans. If we click on the details tab after the summaries tab, we can then see what our specific errors were and warnings, and then anything down below, you can see a total of all the checks. So for example, we can see a slider is present, which in art is a warning. not an error, but it warns you, and then there's information about why it might warn you. But it says 0. There's not a slider on this page, so I don't have that warning visible to me. But I can still see that it checked for it. So on the accuracy, I don't have a good answer on like a percentage yet. Most of the automated tools, depending upon who you ask, I think can accurately identify anywhere between 30, and DQ, which makes the Axe browser dev tool extension, claims like 53% accuracy at identifying issues. Now they do hundreds of audits a year, and they're basing that number on what percentage of problems were caught by our tool, and then what other problems we could only find manually. As far as like how we compare to them, I think like a lot of our rules are very similar to like Axe and Wave, and we have a really good accuracy on pretty much all of them. The one that gives us the most trouble is the color contrast one, which is the hardest. And you'll notice even in DQ, that's one that they frequently says, look at this. Like it wants you to test it as a human being and actually confirm. It's like, this might be a problem, but we can't tell. But because our tool was launched in December, I don't have a good percentage. Like, I don't know if I feel comfortable saying yet, like we can find 40% of the problem on a page, you know? I wish I did. And I think that might be something that over time, hopefully we'll get some better data on. But anyway, so with ours, so an example would be like, let's look at this incorrect heading order. If I click to expand this, I can then see what is the incorrect heading order. And if I wasn't sure, I could click on the I, and that would take us over to a page on our website that explains more about what incorrect heading order is, how it impacts accessibility, what you can do to fix it. But in this instance, we would look at something. So for example, here's an H5, and it says your best local roofing services. I could scroll up to the top and find that, which I know is right up here at the top. And I'm like, oh, this is at the very top of my page, and this is why it flagged. It's an H5, and right below it is a heading 1 for leading roofing service in New York areas. So then I'd have to make a decision, is this still my heading 1 for the page, or should this, your best local roofing, actually be heading 1, even though it has smaller styles? Like right? Obviously we all know this has SEO implications. It has a lot of other implications as well. For this one, arguably, I'd say all we need to do is we need to just turn this into a paragraph, maybe make sure that it's white, and we would then update our page. And if we go back down below the content, back to the accessibility checker, we're going to see that our incorrect heading order is now actually, there's only 4 of them, and that one is no longer visible here. So our scanning tool, what's useful about this is it can help. We made it not just for developers, but also ideally for clients, for them to try and figure out. Now, there are some things where if they see broken ARIA reference, they're going to be like, what the heck is this? I don't know how to fix it. And that's where you get to make money, which is nice. So you use an automated scanning tool. And then the next thing that you want to do is come on the front end of your website and do some keyboard testing. So I'm going to be using my tab and arrow keys primarily, but for keyboard testing, I usually just do the tab, and that allows me to move through the focuses. So the first thing I want to see, and let me actually, so it's ideal to do this not logged in, because you sometimes get some false positives, and you'll notice that even if you ran Wave on this page, there's like a color contrast error or something in the WordPress admin bar. And you could have no color contrast errors on your page, but it'll be in the WordPress admin bar. So you have to sort of be aware of that. But basically, the first thing I want to do is when I hit tab, the first thing I should see is a skip to content link. You might have skip, depending upon your theme, you may also have skip to navigation, skip to footer. Those can be useful. The only one that is really required or necessary in order to achieve the web content accessibility guidelines for bypass blocks would be having a skip to content. I'm going to hit my enter key in order to activate this, and it should jump me down, I'm expecting, to this area with starting with your best local roofing service. What that does is it allows me as a keyboard user to get quickly to the content without having to go through everything that's in a navigation menu. So it jumped down. Now I'm going to hit tab to see where I am, and I'm expecting that I'm going to be focused on the get a free estimate button. But you'll notice what happened when I hit tab was that it went down to the form to request an estimate. So I'm thinking, oh, this is strange. So I would need to then assess, where did the content button jump, the jump link? Does it actually think the content starts in this Your Hometown Roofing section, as opposed to the hero section at the top of the page? Or is there another problem? So I shift tabbed back up, and I'm trying to see, can I get to those? If you do shift tab, you go backwards. If you do tab, you go forward. So I'm trying to think, can I get to that view our services button or the get a free estimate button? And right now, I don't think I can, because you'll notice I'm on the projects right now. Now I'm on services, now I'm on about us. So I'm going to tab forward again. So services, projects, contact us. It missed the get a free estimate. And then it went right here. So pretty much on this website, I know I have a problem because these buttons, I'm now using my mouse, get a free estimate, view our services, cannot be interacted with by someone on a keyboard. There's no way for them to go to those buttons. Also, the other one that either I wasn't focused on or didn't have a focus state is this get a free estimate in the heading. So that's really what you want to do. You want to go through and see, obviously, can you get to everything with your keyboard? I would want to try this form that's here, fill it out, and then say, can I hit the send request button just by hitting the enter key, or the space bar will work on buttons as well, in order to submit the form if I can't use a mouse. This one thing that is nice is it's really obvious. The button changed from sort of this red color to black when I tabbed over it. Sometimes we have buttons where they only get a little bit darker, and that's not a very obvious change. And so someone, especially who has low vision, it might not be as obvious to them that they're on the button. So you really want to have good color contrast, not just in your text, but also thinking about between your focus state and your normal state, or your hover state. So now I've hit tab again, and I think I'm on, yep. So where I am is I'm on this get a free estimate that's down in the footer. I'll highlight it with my mouse. And you can see if I hit the next tab, it became red. But the problem here is that these two buttons, their background state is a dark color, and the background of the container is dark. So it's not obvious when you first go to it that that's where you are. So you're kind of looking for all of these sorts of things. And then the next thing you do is use a screen reader. And you would move through it with a screen reader. You'd listen for what it has to say. Some things I listen for are any sort of ambiguous links or buttons that don't make sense out of context. If it has any confusing statements or unexpected behavior. If you're hearing any interruptions, so sometimes if you have a slider higher up on the page, it might be announcing the slide every time it changes, even though they're way down reading something else. And so it can interrupt what it's reading to them. You want to see if there's any sort of missing announcements or alerts. I see this sometimes on forms where the form has an error and it visually shows it with red boxes and says error, but there's nothing that says to a blind person, error, your form was not submitted. So that would be something you'd want to listen for on a screen reader. And then what if you don't have an expert in-house? What do you do? So you could partner with an accessibility firm, mark up their fees and resell audit services to your clients. That's something that we have started doing, and it's been working really well with some of the agencies we've been partnering with. You could potentially find someone where you send your clients to them and receive a referral commission. We've been working on developing sort of an on-call accessibility consultant where you have like a monthly plan. And then what if you don't know how to fix the plugin issues? You know, sometimes if you've built a website with a theme, like you might be a really great designer, but you don't know, like that issue we just saw where we couldn't get to the buttons in the middle. How would I fix that? I don't know, right? That's where I think GoWP, the dedicated developer, could really come in, because they could help you with those code fixes or maybe coding something. I'm sure Emily has more thoughts about that, but I think, you know, you don't have to be an expert in accessibility or an expert in development in order to start adding accessibility to your services. So that's pretty much what I have. We have a Facebook group that's just about accessibility. We don't talk about all the awesome things that they talk about in the Nice Agency Owner group, which is why I love that group. But if you want to talk WordPress accessibility, or I'm happy to answer questions, and I'm also be in that group. And anytime we have now, I can answer too.
Thank you, Amber. That was so fantastic. That was really, really great presentation, and you shed a light on a lot of really interesting topics and ideas and kind of next steps for folks watching to kind of get started or improve or reinforce the accessibility services they're already offering, which we saw in the chat that there are quite a few people watching today who are either already offering accessibility services or looking to kind of beef up what they do offer and maybe just get started offering some as well. So that was a fantastic presentation. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks.
I do want to address, we did have a bunch of technical issues, not for folks here in the Zoom webinar, but for folks watching on Facebook. So I am sorry about that. I don't know what was going on there, but we will have the full recording for everybody that will be available by tomorrow morning. So we'll make sure to share that in the Facebook group also. So sorry about all of those technical issues. All right, so we did get a few questions that came in. So to make a site ADA compliant, do you have to redesign it, rebuild it, or will you just modify the code, add tags and attributes to comply? So kind of going into the remediation thing that you were talking about earlier, and what would you recommend there? How would you decide what would be the best route for an existing website?
I think it really depends on the type and number of issues. So if they have a lot of color contrast issues, for example, then it might warrant, it could just be a refresh where you just change all the colors in the color palette, or it might be a conversation where they start to rethink their brand, right? And then that becomes a whole new website. I think too, sometimes there's a threshold where you're looking at how many problems there are, and you might realize, you know, everything in the navigation needs to be rebuilt, like everything in the footer needs to be rebuilt. All of your forms are bad, and you're not using a form plugin, which most of the form plugins are great on accessibility, but you're just using a form that's built into your page builder. And so it's like you start to add all this up and you're like, it would be faster for me and cheaper for you if I just built you a new website. And I think clients appreciate that, you know, if you're honest on that front. So I think it's sort of like a balance of what it is. And then also, how old is the current website, right? If they've had their website for 5 years, it's probably needs a refresh anyway. So that's another thing where we would say, okay, let's just do that rather than remediate.
Yeah, it sounds like it can be a great way to kind of a great opportunity to upsell or create that bigger proposal that you've talked about quite a bit in this presentation, like not only adding accessibility as a service, but taking the open door of, hey, we're interested in accessibility and stepping in and saying, you know what, actually we could do all of this also, and just seeing what people are open to. So.
Yeah, we do 1 page, 5-page, and 10-page audits. And the 1-page audit, it's typically on their homepage if it's a 1-page audit. Like it's still useful from like a manual, like giving them an idea. Obviously, it's not comprehensive at all, right? But it gives them an idea of what are the problems that may exist like throughout the site, because we're getting the header, the footer, like those kinds of things. And that can be a really great jumping off point. If somebody doesn't have a huge budget, like they could do a 1-page, or they could do a 5-page audit where you just look at some representative pages. And then you can use that as a sales tool, but ideally they've paid you for the audit, right?
Right, absolutely. That's great, thank you. Another question came in. So are there any liabilities that a web service provider should be aware of in helping clients with their sites or in building and selling accessible sites? So can it come back to bite them if they say, we built you this accessible site and, you know, maybe they missed something or?
Yeah, so I'm not an attorney. I will say I pay somewhat close attention to the different lawsuits and what are out there. There have been a few that have included companies, or there have been 1 or 2 instances. There was a pretty big one a couple of years ago against a really big where they paid like millions of dollars for their website, and it was like a state website maybe, and then it was not accessible, so they sued the company who built it. But for the most part, I think I haven't seen as much of that. I think the big thing is documenting, you know, like we just had a client where they want to add nutrition facts, and we're like, we gave them 2 quotes. We're like, you want to do what you want, which is you give us an image and we put the image of your nutrition facts up, and it costs X dollars, but it is not, people who are blind or screen readers and disabilities will not know the nutrition facts for your food. Or we can code this out so it's all in text and accessible, and here's the price. And we've just very clearly said, and they say in writing, no, I don't care, I want the cheaper option, right? So I think if you do that kind of stuff, it's helpful. And then again, like they have to know, like even our audit clients, it's a point in time. You know, it was accessible at the time that we said it was accessible. It could be not accessible 2 days later if you go add 5 blog posts and you don't, you know.
Absolutely.
So I feel
I
like if you have a pretty decent contract attorney, you'll be okay.
Yeah.
We haven't had a problem. I don't know.
Yeah, that's great. And I do love that you said this earlier in your presentation as well, but you know, asking folks to sign off on that and say, I realize that my site won't be accessible. So kind of protecting yourself in that way, but also making them aware and creating that. So it's a little bit of a different angle, but yeah, I think that's a fair answer. And like you said, you're not a lawyer. So that's answered to the best of your abilities. So if one question came in, if they were to get the pro version of the accessibility checker, can they load it onto a dev site and then transfer the license from the dev site to a live site? Is that something that you all allow, or how would that work?
So we have 1 site, 5 site, 10 site licenses. None of them actually have limits on dev sites. So you could buy a single site and have unlimited dev sites. That's sort of a thing that we've done for agencies because I think it's nice. We use EDD, so if you're familiar with that, so it sets up a Stripe subscription. So it's not really intended to like transfer a single site to your client, because it would be like you'd have to figure out like canceling the subscription and then they'd have to log in, right? It doesn't remove the data if you know, so you could change the license key, like have your client go purchase it. Which I think is what makes sense if it's going to stay. Otherwise, you could purchase a multi-site pack and then you would maintain the license, but you get a discount if you buy, you know, more licenses.
Great. Yeah, I think that answers that question. Another question, do you find more accessibility issues out of the box with Gutenberg or other page builders?
So I think they're probably more out of the box with page builders, but it's kind of like specific widgets or elements in them. And the same could happen if you installed like a third-party block plugin. I think the more issues is, so for example, that theme that I just demoed, that was demo content. I just was like, let's install this exactly as it is, right? And you see like there are a lot of problems in it. The actual parent theme that is doesn't have any accessibility, but like the template that they designed has like the headers in the wrong order and like those kinds of things, right? So I think it tends to come more in the theme or like the installed starter packs for the page builder than it is necessarily like, because you're using XYZ page builder, you have more errors. It's like whoever set up the template didn't know about accessibility.
Interesting. Yeah. And we did have someone in the chat earlier say that they were currently testing a new theme for accessibility and using blocks versus a page builder.
Yeah. I mean, any core WordPress blocks are going to have a lot less problems on the output. But a lot of them with the page builders is it's really how you set it up and configure it. And you know, a paragraph block and a heading block is a paragraph block and a heading block, and they're not going to have accessibility problems. But if you start to be like, ooh, look at this fancy slider, or I'm going to put, you know, video backgrounds behind everything, well, now all of a sudden you may have other problems.
Absolutely. Yep. That makes sense. The last question, and I know we are 5 minutes over here, so I understand if people have to go. But the last question we had come in is, do you recommend an accessibility statement in the footer of websites?
Yes, I definitely do, for 2 reasons. One is I actually was talking to a person who specializes in accessibility, an attorney, and he said that in his experience that helps to decrease the like drive-by lawsuits, the people that are just like out trying to get cash, or the lawyers trying to get cash. So it can actually legitimately provide protection, at least from what an attorney has told me. And then the second reason is it is a good way to show people that you care, and then find an easy way for them to figure out how to contact you for accessibility help. So what would be important is in that statement, besides saying your commitment, what you're doing, maybe what you're trying to improve in, you want to have a really clear phone number if you can, or at the least an email address. So don't put a form on that page. Like it wants to be as easy as possible. Like if you need accessibility help, here's how you contact us. And that's a fast way for someone to find that information and get help.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Amber. Those are all the questions that have come in. So we'll take this moment to wrap up. Again, we will have the full recording available, and I'll share that. If you've registered for this webinar, you'll get it in an email. And also Amber has generously said that she will share her slides as well. So you'll have access to all of those links also. So keep an eye on your inbox for that email coming soon. And yeah, thank you everybody for joining us today. And thank you so much, Amber, for sharing your expertise and all your experience and insights you have on this topic. It's really been enlightening for me especially. I loved it. Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for watching, and we'll see you at the next webinar. Have a great afternoon.
Bye.
Bye.